Many traditions talk about ancestors, elders, and wisdom keepers. Do these beings actually still have an impact on us today? If so, what role do they play? What makes them special? There are a lot of stories and beliefs around them, and also a pretty common misconception. In this episode, we talk about wisdom keepers, elders, and ancestors, how they overlap and how they're different, how they're helping us as we transition to the new consciousness, and how to identify a wisdom keeper and what to watch out for. After the discussion, we get to the most important part of this episode. The group frequency calibration at the end is where the frequency work happens and where change actually occurs. So be sure to listen to that. Without releasing distortion patterns targeted by the GFC, the change you want will be more difficult to attain because you haven't addressed the root of the issue. My name is Karen Cheong, and today in Mastering Your World Through Frequencies, we're discussing the wisdom keepers, elders, and ancestors.
So today, this is one of my favorite topics. We're going to talk about the wisdom keepers and the ancestors. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I love it so much is I've had spent some special time with ancestral elders, ancestors in embodiment and not in embodiment, and been privileged enough to hear the wisdom. So I think my question would be, what are they? Mm-hmm. You know, really, what are they at a frequency level? Mm-hmm. You know, what are they and how are they different?
Yeah. That's a huge kettle of fish. And so what I'll say is this is my perspective based on frequencies and what I know now. Okay, so and not everybody is the same, of course, right? So I'm speaking generally of wisdom keepers, but of course there's like nuance based on each individual. All right, so I'm going to preface it by that. So the wisdom keepers are very special beings. They're here to hold a certain frequency resonance so that we can, as a consciousness, accelerate. That's sort of like a bottom line. So they hold a specific frequency resonance and a specific remembering that we, as a collective, can gain from. They've been waiting for this time. Mm-hmm. So they are beings that are usually of a higher order, meaning a higher frequency resonance. They came through and to have an embodied experience. And then in that embodiment, they often are elders of some kind. Mm-hmm. And some of them that I've met actually have intact memory. So they remember their incarnations. They remember where they come from. They're very clear on it. They may not be very public about it. Mm-hmm. They might not share it with many people at all, but it's definitely there. And so they hold in the resonance that they are a higher level order so that we, when the time is right, can be accelerated by them, either through something that they share or simply by being in their presence. It's just like the new consciousness kids. Mm-hmm. The new consciousness kids that some of you have heard me talk about before. So a lot of people want their kids to be new consciousness kids, which I understand because it sounds really cool. But new consciousness kids are very specific beings. They are beings that are from a higher dimensional order, a higher level of frequency resonance. And they can drop into embodiment now because consciousness is high enough that the embodiment is resonating high enough that they can sustain being in embodiment. It's not so dense. They can actually exist. And their function, their purpose is in their beingness in embodiment to help the consciousness of humanity to rise because their resonance exists in the embodiment. Mm-hmm. So the wisdom keepers and the new consciousness kids share that in common. They're very different, but they're kind of similar in that way.
I was just going to say, how does that relate to the ancestors?
Yeah. You know? So they have a similar function. They do it in different ways. The new consciousness kids have not necessarily incarnated as much as the wisdom keepers.
Ah, that's the key.
That's the key.
Got it.
The wisdom keepers have been here for many, many incarnations.
So they know the suffering of the illusion, which we have already talked about in the previous podcast.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Because you and I have met an elder that, the way you describe it, has never forgotten where he came from.
That's right.
Okay, and some of the stuff he shared was pretty mind-blowing.
Yes.
And so, I mean, you're saying that his purpose really is to, well, I guess you use the word entrain a lot.
Yes.
Is that to help us entrain?
Yeah, to his resonance.
To his resonance?
Yeah.
Or just even plant a seed
Yes.
in the field to understand that there's more than what we think there is?
Yes, exactly.
Uh-huh.
And because they remember and they're watching and they're more neutral than we are. So they're still having a human experience. So please know that the wisdom keepers and the elders, or the ancestors, whatever you want to call them, they exist on a spectrum, just like we all do, of frequency resonance. So some vibrate higher than others. So I just want to say, it's not like they're one thing. There's never one thing. There's different flavors of the same thing. So they're on a spectrum. So the elder that you're referring to is actually very high in his frequency resonance.
Yeah.
And he remembers all these different incarnations he has had in this form of embodiment.
Yeah.
Meaning as a human.
Yes.
And so he's, it's funny because he is to me, he has a very high resonance of love. So people always are attracted to him.
Yeah.
And he is love in a way. And I don't mean that from a human perspective. He just emanates love.
Mm-hmm.
So people are very attracted to him because it's a very high resonance. And he's not as concerned with the things that most humans are concerned about.
Yeah.
Because he just doesn't, he realizes who he is as consciousness, and he's having an embodied experience for pleasure, really. And also because his function, in part, is to help consciousness rise. He's very quiet about it, actually.
Yeah.
And a lot of people would overlook him.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But he's very powerful. And what he does is he just sort of, he's kind of mischievous in a way, you know. he's sort of like watching to see who he's going to like drop these little seeds on, and then he waits to see if the seed sets and grows, or what happens with that seed. He's really lovely, actually. And anyway, so the wisdom keepers remember different pieces of different things.
Okay.
So he remembers a lot.
Yeah.
So he remembers a lot of things. He remembers that he is infinite, indestructible consciousness. He remembers that he's outside of, meaning the illusion doesn't have to affect him the way it affects most people. Mm-hmm. He can manipulate the illusion if he wants to. And I say manipulate as if it's negative. It's not. He just can change things.
Oh, well, do you remember that story?
Yeah.
About him as a little kid?
Which one?
He had walking home for school, and he had a massive migraine.
Mm-hmm.
And he laid on the rock or on the grass because it was like, oh, this is too much. And the sun started blasting in his eyes, and he was like, no, not. And he just moved that cloud across because that light's hurting my eyes. You know, when you have a migraine,
yeah.
And he just, and the cloud moved, and he just lay in the shade for a while and he said it just so casually, you know.
Yeah.
And I remember the time thinking, what? You can't just drop a story in like that, you know, as if it's an everyday thing.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
So that's what I mean by wisdom keeper. He remembers that,
Mm.
you know, and so from a young age in this lifetime, he was able to do all that because he has a memory of it. I don't mean a memory in the same way we have memory, but he just has a knowingness that things are not the same for him as they are for other people.
Yeah.
And what he's concerned about is not the same as what other people are. Actually, he doesn't have that much concern, really. It's different. His view of the world is very different.
And so there's like, for me, the question that I had was, okay, if they are at this different level, we'll say, and they haven't forgotten, why are they here? You know, what's the purpose?
Yeah.
You know, why wouldn't they just go back and move on? Or
because they know that their resonance needs to be in the embodiment to have a certain amount of transformation or catalytic force through the density. So when you're not embodied and you're at a very high level order, okay, of consciousness, okay, there you are out there vibrating very high level. We're very dense in the embodiment. And so it's like they're yelling through mud at us. They're like, hello, do you hear me? And we're like, what?
Yeah.
Is something happening? You know, when they really, like, we're kind of clueless, actually, because we're very, like, there's the density of the vibration that we are is very, very heavy. So in many ways, a number of them have come into the embodiment, well, first of all, for their own pleasure, to experience the embodiment, for their own growth, and to help.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of like clear someone's next to you being like, hello, did you not get that lesson? Maybe you should look again. Or whatever, you see? So that's in part why they're in embodiment. So, and because they are embodied, not only do they help just in their beingness through the embodiment, and can they physically tell somebody, humans have this thing with story.
Yeah.
Okay. We learn a lot through story. That's how we learn, that's how we grow, that's how we share experience, etc. So in their story of their journey, whatever it is, not just this particular person that we're talking about, but any of them, we learn. So we start to feel that story's resonance and it triggers something in us. We're like, there's something oddly familiar about what they're saying.
Yeah.
And it's not my experience, but it's like feels familiar. You know, it's like we somehow can relate to it. And within their story, it's almost like we kind of can start to move into the possibility of what they experienced. Like we remember who we are through them.
Yeah, we
in
get
a way,
feel for
it.
resonance.
Yeah. So I feel like that's in part what they do. Some of them have experienced a lot of forgetting because there's so much oppression and abuse that we have inflicted on our native peoples.
Yeah.
So in that suffering, a lot of them are holding on to the resonance they are, sort of like by their fingernails.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is not just terrible for them, but as a collective, as consciousness, it's not serving us as a whole.
Yeah.
But it's hard for them because there's so much suffering around them. They struggle sometimes to hold that resonance.
Yeah.
It can be really hard.
Right.
Yeah.
So the other thing that's, in hearing that, because it kind of relates to the point you just made, I'm wondering, I've also met some elders that are a little bit naughty. So, because we have different, I feel like we have different layers.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I've been in ceremony and I've often found myself thinking, well, what's the ceremony for? But this is ancient wisdom. So I sit there and, well, this is ancient wisdom though. This is important. And sometimes it really is. And sometimes I'm like, well, this is just old wisdom. Yeah, and it feels like it's important to be able to differentiate. You know,
absolutely.
You've got some elders or even shamans that are a little bit
dark.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that happens too. I think that happens in all forms, not just, the native traditions, but even in like the greater, traditions of, and please know, I'm not denigrating this culture, but like in the Indian culture or even Chinese cultures, there's like the Eastern cultures that have these ancient wisdoms in there. And some of it has wisdom and some of it is just an old consciousness, an old form of wisdom that is from the old consciousness that is laden with, caste systems, abuse, differentiation and power between males and females, like a whole bunch of stuff that's in there.
Yeah.
Okay. It's sort of like interwoven. So whatever it is, I think it's important to discern whatever tradition you're faced with in terms of like wisdom that's being presented to you, to discern for yourself, is this for me? To hold your space with it and be like, okay, this is being presented to me. Is this of a resonance that's like of a higher order? And do I want to take this in as true for me? To just take that moment and just be like, well, okay, they're saying this, but I don't know if that's true for me. And that's okay. Because part of the wisdom is the discernment, right? For you. And it may be that it's being presented to you in that moment to be able to stand in your own power, to hold your own space, to be like, actually, that's not true for me. Some of this is true for me. Some of this isn't.
Yeah.
And to leave what doesn't serve you and to take what does.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important to, whatever is being presented to you, to ask that question and to continue to hold your space, so that, why? To recognize your own authority, your own ability to discern what is feels to you to be of a higher resonance that you actually want. Because as you say, it's really, it's amazing. A lot of people right now are like throwing themselves at the feet of people who call themselves shamans. And I'm like, well, just because they're a shaman, they're necessarily awake or wise. What are they manipulating? There's a whole bunch of different things, but we hear the word shaman and all of a sudden it seems like they must know more than us and they must have some access to something that's very special.
Yeah.
Okay. Or whatever shaman, teacher, guru, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter, whatever you want to label someone like this as. You have to be just mindful that to hold your own space Okay. And to just check with yourself and say, okay, well, does this apply to you? Because sometimes, it can be very sincere, actually. And what they're practicing, as you say, is an ancient consciousness, an ancient wisdom. And it's no longer this resonance that will buoy you now.
Yeah, that's where I felt that I had to make a critical decision.
Yeah.
Because it was, I love ceremony and I love elemental magic.
Yeah.
But to be well versed in something as opposed to have the resonance of something is quite different.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
And trying to understand what the ceremony was for, because there's like a repetition of ceremony. If you do ceremony, then somehow you have ancient wisdom.
Yeah.
And for me, I was struggling with that. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, what is this all for?
For, yeah.
And I felt like, just like you say, it came from a time, a consciousness where it was required.
Yes.
And now I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It's like maybe at times it is, maybe at times it isn't. Maybe it was just to help us understand the interconnectedness of everything.
Yep.
Just muddling through all that. So yeah, from a frequency perspective, I just wanted to understand, do they hold a certain resonance that is helping us elevate us to the next? Because we hear that a lot. That they're anchoring us to a certain resonance so that we can lift ourselves up to the new consciousness.
Yes.
So I think this is why a lot of us revere them as well, without actually any kind of, hang on a minute, how am I feeling? Am I in resonance with this, or am I not? We just, because we want the new consciousness.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of like a form of exoticism in a way, like fetishization of them in a way. It's like, instead of just handing over your power to something that seems exotic and different and like perhaps elevated, to really scan yourself and see, is this relevant to me now, as you say, right? And like, why are we doing this? And do these ceremonies still serve us? And why do we have to keep doing it over and over again? And perhaps they're critical at certain moments to help us see beyond certain things and to recognize the oneness, to recognize there's more than the physical, that there is a portal to different, very powerful forms of the unseen, that is beyond the physical. And there's a lot of it. And yes, you can access it in that way. And why do you want to? Yeah. Why do you want to? And when you have that, what do you think that means about you? There's like all this meaning that we associate to it. Yeah. And so that would be the questions that I would ask. So please know, the wisdom keepers are extraordinarily important. As you say, not all of them, because it's funny, who we ascribe to as who we say are wisdom keepers and who are actually wisdom keepers may not be the same thing. But the ones who are wisdom keepers are extraordinarily important, because as they have anchored us and are continuing to anchor us into this resonance into which we are moving, because they have not forgotten. Yeah. Yeah, that's vital. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. And so they're very quiet. Actually, the most powerful wisdom keepers I've met are extraordinarily quiet. Oh. They don't need to bring attention to themselves. There's no reason for them to. That's right. At all. Right? Yeah. Why? That's not. They don't function in the same way that we do in terms of like our ego minds, what we desire, all that stuff, because they recognize who they truly are. They know it, like through every fiber of their being. So what is there to prove? Nothing. Yeah. I'm laughing because the elder that we've met, I went up one day because he was doing a ceremony to welcome a group of people, and I expected, this tremendous, glamorous kind of a ceremony, and we just sat in chairs in a circle in his living room, and he said a couple of things, and I was like, "That's it, that's the ceremony." But wait, where's the chime and all this, and the sage, and the Nope. No? Yeah, exactly. And that brings the question, like, why do you need ceremony? Yeah, right? I kept wondering that, but yeah. So the take on this at a frequency resonance level really is, the message to take home is, they do have a purpose. Absolutely. And it's something around reminding us of who we truly are. Yeah. And in training to that frequency. Yes. And it's also reminding us to hold our space and always check in with
does this resonate in this moment in time for me to be true?
Yes. And I would say the wisdom keepers who are of a higher order, like the gentleman you're speaking of, will not try to get you to do something. They don't try to control you. There's no like attempt to persuade.
Yeah.
They don't have to, because he remembers who he is, right? He knows he's infinite. He knows what he's capable of. Why does he need to make you do that? And he remembers the oneness. So you're simply an aspect of him. So if someone's saying they're a wisdom keeper and trying to get you to do something or convince you of something or whatever, okay, there's some form of aspect of control. Please know this is not a wisdom keeper. Yes, they are somebody who is trying to manipulate our desire for something outside of us that seems more elevated. So just be aware. That's what I'm saying. Hold your space, because just because someone says there's something, and some of them, can manipulate, like it's to manipulate the earth realm. It's a powerful thing.
Oh yeah,
it is powerful, right? And it's not necessarily, I'm not saying it isn't, but it's not necessarily an indication of a higher frequency level being, a being that's awake, a being that is more in line with pure source, that recognizes who they are. But people confuse those two things. They think, oh, they have abilities, therefore they must be awake. No. You can have abilities and not be awake. Completely possible. So, and I've seen it a lot, actually. So when you and I think are talking about wisdom keepers, they can do all kinds of things, but they don't need to show it to you.
That's right.
Because they have nothing to prove. So,
in fact, oftentimes they refuse.
Yes, exactly. They do refuse, because it's not about them trying to convince you. You're coming into your own power. So there's no reason for them to like pull out the stops and the bells and the whistles and the whatnot. They're not trying to manipulate you.
Okay, so obviously the discussion's awesome, but the work is in the GFC.
Yes.
So I'm curious to find out what the GFC is for
be
this one.
So for those of you who would like to start to do the work or the frequency work that will allow you to move into the remembering that these wisdom keepers hold, the entrainment into this higher level order of remembering, part of that is to release the distortion patterns, that you have. So by doing frequency work, you can start to move into the direction of the frequency resonance that these beings hold for us. So if you're wanting to do that, then I do recommend you listen to the group frequency calibration meditation associated with this episode. And if you have had the privilege of meeting a wisdom keeper, if you want to share your experience in the comments below, we'd love to hear them. We're about to start the group frequency calibration, or GFC, where we actually do the frequency work and where change is catalyzed. To get to the GFC, click on the square that'll appear to the right or the link in the description below. It's time to bring in a new experience, a new consciousness, and a new world. Let's rise together.